We're going to continue with equations here and actually go into some more real problem solving examples. So instead of being sort of direct translation examples where we're looking for keywords, we're going to actually have some context now in the example. So these tend to be a little bit harder. So let's talk about some strategies first. So the first thing in any sort of word problem is that you need to understand the problem. Now, this is easier said than done, right? This is the hardest thing to do. So things that you can do is you can read the problem. And I suggest you read multiple times, not just once. You may want to underline key ideas or numbers. You may want to draw a picture if you find it helpful. You may want to take notes, etc. So whatever helps you get organized, that's the first thing you're going to do. The other thing you're going to do here, I'm going to do this in a different color because this is sort of all background information, is I like to also state the goal of the problem and define the variable. So what does the variable represent here? What does the variable mean in this case? You also may need to define other unknowns in terms of this variable. So for right now, we are only learning how to solve equations with one variable. So that means when you're setting up your equations for problem solving, you can't use two variables. So if there's two things you need to find a way to write them as just using one variable. So you may use that same variable to help represent other unknowns as well. Then you're going to write an equation. To represent the problem. You're going to solve the equation. That part should be easy at this point. The hardest part is setting it up. And then you're also going to interpret and check your results. So things you want to do there is to write your answer using units or perhaps a sentence, right? So x equals 30 has no meaning. You want to actually say, what does 30 represent? Is it 30 inches? Are you talking about a height? Are you talking about a weight? What are you talking about? And then you also want to make sure your answer seems reasonable. Now, there's no perfect check here. So you can also check it the traditional way by plugging your answer back into the equation and things like that. But because we set up the equation ourselves, it's not a perfect check. So I don't have a perfect check here, but you do want to make sure your answer seems reasonable. You know, for instance, if we're talking about the length and width of a swimming pool, and your answer is x equals negative 30 and y equals 10 or something like that, whatever your values are, if you get a negative answer for a length or a width, something is clearly wrong, right? That doesn't make sense. Or if we're talking about the height of a person and you have that their height is 12 feet tall, something's wrong, right? So you want to think about, is your answer reasonable? Does it seem to make sense? All right, so let's go through two examples here. So the distance by road from Chicago to LA is 1,091 miles more than the distance from Chicago to Boston. If the total of these two distances is 3,017 miles, find the distance from Chicago to Boston. And the source here for this information is from the World Almanac. All right, so there's a lot going on here, right? This is one where you would probably want to read it through a few times. So it's a good time to pause the video, read through a couple times, make sure you understand the information you're given. So we have the distance by road from Chicago to LA is 1,091 miles more than the distance from Chicago to Boston. I know the total of the two distances is 3,017, and I want to find the distance from Chicago to Boston. So for me, after I read it through a few times, I usually like to start with my goal. What am I trying to do here? And my goal is right here. My goal is to find the distance from Chicago to Boston. So this is my main unknown. So your goal, I like writing it out instead of just kind of underlining it, just to really drive home what you're trying to find. It's going to help you answer the question at the end anyway, so that you understand what you were doing. And then it helps you to find your variable. So here I have one thing I'm trying to find. So this is going to be my variable. So we're going to let x equal the distance from Chicago to Boston. Okay. Now I'm just going to draw a little picture here too. So I'm going to say like here's Chicago, kind of in the middle of the country, right? And then, so let's say we're going to Boston. Let's say I'm kind of looking at a map here. So the distance from Chicago to Boston is going to be X miles. Right, we're in miles here. And then we're also going from Chicago to LA. Now, what do I know about Chicago to LA? If I go back and I read here, I know that Chicago to LA is 1,091 miles more than the distance from Chicago to Boston. So this here is 1,091 miles more than the distance from Chicago to Boston. Now, more means addition, right? So I'm looking at the distance from Chicago to Boston. We don't know. We know it's X. And we're going more than this. So that must mean we're going 1,091 miles more than the distance to Boston. So here I've underlined, I've read, I've drawn a picture, I've defined, I've written my goal, I've made notes. So I'm doing anything I can to understand this problem. And the last thing I know is that the total distance is equal to 3,017. Well, total is a word that means to add. So that means that my distance to Boston plus the distance to LA from Chicago is 3,017 altogether. My distance to Boston is X. My distance to LA is 1,091 plus X. I'm just using parentheses here just to show you the two distances. You don't really need parentheses. I just want to show you where they come from. And now we have a problem we can solve. So let me just rewrite it so I can solve it. So first thing, I do have like terms here. I have X and X, and there is a 1 in front of both of those. So that becomes a 2X plus 1,091 equals 3,017. Now for solving, I do want to get my X by itself. So I'm going to subtract this 1,091 from both sides. And I'm just kind of working my way through and borrowing here. And I have 2x is equal to 926. Sorry, 1926. That looks better. And then now finally I can go ahead and just divide by 2 there. Now you can do the long division out yourself. I'm going to save us a little bit of time here, and I will tell you that the answer is 963. So make sure you do your long division off to the side there. And we get our final value here. Now, we need to be careful what this means, right? So our x value is 963. So if I look at my picture, my x value here is the distance from Chicago to Boston. And that's what I was trying to find. Find the distance from Chicago to Boston. So the distance from Chicago to Boston is 963 miles. Now, it didn't ask for it, but if you wanted to find the distance from Chicago to LA, what you could do is use substitution here. So you take that 1,091 and you add in your x value of 963. And if you add those two together, you'll be able to actually get that distance there. And again, I'll save us a little bit of time here, and you get 2,054 miles. So you could find the other value too if that problem happened to ask for it. All right, let's do one last example because these do take some time. So a salesperson at an electronics store sold a computer system and software for $2,100, receiving 4 times as much money for the computer system as for the software. Find the price of each. All right, so we have a salesperson that is working at an electronics store, and they sold a computer system and software for $1,200. Now remember, this is the total. I know the word total isn't used there, but it's the total that they have sold altogether. They received 4 times as much money for the computer system as for the software, and we want to find the price of each. So our goal here is to find the price of the computer system and the price of the software, right? Because it asks us to find the price of each. So this one's a little trickier. I have 2 unknowns here, the computer system cost and the software cost, but I can't use 2 variables. So I'm gonna have to think about this. So let me just set this up. So I have price of computer is 1 unknown, and then price of software is the other unknown. So I have to figure out a way to set these up, but using only 1 variable. So let's go back and read through again. So it says that the person received 4 times as much money for the computer system as for the software. So the price of the computer was 4 times as much as the price of the software. So let's think about this. I have a little bit extra information about the computer, but I have nothing about the software. So because I have nothing about the software, I'm going to let that be my variable. So I'm going to let the price of the software be X here, or you can use P for price or S for software, whatever you want to use. And then the price of the computer is 4 times as much. Well, 4 times means multiplied by 4. So the price of the computer then must be 4 times the software, and the software is X. So 4X. So if you have two unknowns, there should be something in the wording that helps you set the other one up. That kind of gives you a key piece of information here. Now, the other thing I know is I do know that my total was 2,100. So the price of the computer plus the price of the software equals 2,100. Well, the price of the computer we said was 4X. The price of the software is just X. Now solving this, 4X and X I can just combine to be 5X. I actually have a pretty simple equation. So a lot of times you may find that the hardest part is setting everything up, and the equations usually aren't too bad to solve. So here I'm going to divide by 5 on both sides. And again, you can do the long division out on your own. I'll save you some work there, and we'll get 420. Now, remember, think about what the question was. Find the price of each. So our X here represented the price of the software. So the price of the software is $420. Now we can find the price of the computer by multiplying it by 4, because it's 4 times as much. So if I do 420 times 4, I see that the price of the computer is $1,680. Now, one thing I kind of forgot to check in the last one is to make sure my answer makes sense here. Now this one does, so if you think about it, my numbers are both positive, which are good. They're both pretty high, which is good too, right? Because the total cost was 2,100. It's a large number. Computers are pretty expensive. Software can be pretty expensive. So these numbers seem reasonable. I do have that one number is 4 times the other. And the other thing I can check is if I add these together, I should make sure I actually get that total, and I do. So that's another great way to check this problem. So there's a few different things that I did. I looked to see if it made sense. I checked the total, and it does work out. For the last example, go back to it for a second. So for this one here, thinking about ways to check this one, which I kind of skipped. So first of all, 963 miles does seem reasonable. Chicago to Boston is pretty far, right? Chicago is over in Illinois, Boston is in Massachusetts. So this does seem a reasonable distance. I also know that my total distance was 3,017. So another thing I could do to check is to add these two distances together and make sure they do check out. I also know that the distance from Chicago to LA is longer, and I can see that my total there is much longer than my total to Boston. So again, there's a few different things there that do show that we look like we're in the right direction. It's not a perfect check, but it does seem like our answers are reasonable. So hopefully we can feel pretty confident in our work there. So those are just a couple examples. And really, for word problems, they can be tough because they're all so different. So you want to use the strategies that we've talked about, use the examples we've already seen to hopefully get you going on how to start some of them. But they're each unique. So you want to read through really carefully, state that goal, define your variable, take your time on the setup. So if you're willing to take your time up front, then the solving and stuff will go quickly. And it will also help you figure out your answer. So if you're asked to write a question, you remember what you were doing because you have that goal written out. You know what you were trying to find. So hopefully those strategies will help you.